Welcome, everybody, to SmashUps, the recruiting marketing podcast. I'm your host, Tim Sackett, as always, and we're brought to you by the folks over at Fistful of Talent. Our sponsor today is SmashFly, the recruitment marketing software company at smashfly.com. Also, make sure you check out the Transform Recruitment Marketing Conference, the only one on the planet, at least that's what they tell me, and that's in Boston in the fall. And I'm sure I'll be there along with a lot of other great recruiting marketing folks. And I know some of the biggest brands will be there as well, sharing ideas, tips, tricks, all that great stuff. And I want to bring in my guest today, which is Carmen Hudson. She is the co-founder of Talent 42, which is a technical recruiting conference that she helped start, how many years ago?
This will be our sixth conference.
About six conference.
For 6 years.
She's also the principal over at Recruiting Toolbox, which is a consultancy that helps you become a better talent acquisition department, function, all those great things. They're super smart over there. She's worked with all the big brands, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon. Like, she knows it all. I'm a big fanboy of hers. She's a superstar. And so I welcome Carmen Hudson and welcome. How are you doing?
Very good. That's a lovely introduction. It's the Mutual Admiration Society, and I know nothing. After all that, I still know nothing. So let's make that clear.
People always ask me, though, they watch the podcast and they'll go, it seems like you're friends with all these people. And I'm like, well, I don't ask them unless I really know them. I'm not gonna make that up. So Carmen and I have gotten to break bread. I know. Once you see people in their swimsuits, at that point, like, there's no more. That's every level of friendship is right there.
It's there. There you go.
So Carmen, I brought you on because there's a topic that keeps coming up, and it doesn't stop. It's probably been coming up for the last 10 years. When I was running corporate talent acquisition departments, I constantly felt the pressure on. I had to break up recruiting. I had to break up the desk. I had to have sourcers. I had to have recruiters. And because, oh my gosh, Synergy and 7 Habits and that stupid Stephen Covey, I got to figure this out, right? And so I'm going to create a sourcing function. And it never seemed to work right. Like, I had sourcers that either loved the job, were getting paid too much, and then my recruiters were pissed off at them. Or on the other side, I had recruiters that loved having sourcing, doing all the work, and my sources were pissed off. But now we get into this whole thing where talent acquisition technology has taken off over the last 5 years. Now there's every sourcing tool imaginable. And I get this feeling now that I'm like, not that sourcing's dead, because it's not dead at all. There's more and more sourcing than ever. But that almost like I don't have to have a separate sourcing function. My recruiters now have the tools to do this on their own. And so I'm wondering, as you think and talk with all these talent acquisition leaders and companies that you work with, kind of what do you see? What do you recommend to them?
Well, a couple of things. I think you're right. All of these tools exist, and there's so many, and every day there are a couple new ones. I don't know that the sourcing skill continues to grow. And in fact, I think it's atrophied because of all the tools.
We could say that about recruiting too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think that the core sourcing skill, and at Recruiting Toolbox, we have a saying, the root of all evil is misalignment. And that's where everything goes wrong. It's at the very beginning. It's not in the midst when you're sourcing and sharing candidates. It's really understanding what and whom you want to hire at the very beginning, and making sure the hiring manager, the recruiter, the sourcer, the recruiting coordinator, that the VP of the division, that everyone's aligned around what it is you want to hire, and that you actually study that to a depth that we typically don't do in recruiting. And so that's usually where I start the sourcing conversation. Do we really know what it is that we want to hire? Once we get past that, then it becomes, what's the timeline on this? What's the volume that we're looking for, and whether or not it's appropriate to even bring in recruiting. I think most roles can be recruited without the use of any, industrial strength sourcing. So often, it should be the recruiter's role. And it's nice to chill out, and while, a sourcer goes and brings back, 50 of the same profile for you, but really that's your job as a recruiter. We all know that. But sometimes we get those gigs, and we're excited to have those. And, if you've got one of those right now, luxuriate in it. It's not going to last forever. I'm just being honest here. But there are those times where you have to bring in the strong sourcers. Now, that means that there are a lot of people out there calling themselves sourcers who really shouldn't be called sourcers, right? They are resume parsers, they are, reviewers, but they're not sourcers. Once you get a hold of someone who's really great at finding that talent that you need, who understands the profile, can go after talent that's either scarce, difficult to find, or difficult to move, whatever that scarcity is, that's where you actually have to figure out, okay, do I need this in a quantity? Do I need a whole department of these people? Or do I need a small band of these people who can help us out when it's needed? So really understanding what your challenge is. For a lot of companies that I work with, they do need a small band of these people, or sometimes even a medium or larger size band of these people who can actually go out and find the rare, scarce talent. Most of the time, it's not that. I don't think it's a high quantity that's needed. My recommendation is usually start small, and I am a big fan of the pods.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a great client-facing recruiter who's also great at pulling in the great candidates and converting leads into candidates and candidates into hires, pair that person up with someone who's great at finding the scarce talent, and have those folks work out what does that handoff look like, what's the division responsibilities. They're usually higher-level professionals, and they will work that out. Once that works, go for it.
I love that, because I think so many people, especially talent acquisition leaders, will come to it and they say, okay, here's our entire process from A to Z. Now, where do we chop it in half? And what it makes sense with that bucket of work that now sourcing you have this and recruiting you have this, which, again, depending on the rec volume, the time of year, all that stuff, none of those buckets ever equal out. I mean, sometimes you're interviewing more, sometimes you're screening more, whatever it might be. And so I love that, where you go, look, don't take a look at the positions that you're just struggling with and have sources work there. I don't really hear that very often. Most of what I hear is, okay, our sources work everything, which again, then they're not really sourcing. They're just like, oh, I'm going to meet my metrics because I'm just going to shove you a bunch of easy resumes I can find, and the hard stuff, well, that's always hard.
If you got that job, you're also, posting and roasting too, so that's good, right?
Posting and roasting, for sure. So clearly you wouldn't recommend, or I mean, I guess so if you take a look at it from that standpoint and you go in and you say, hey, TA leader, you have 10 people on your TA team. I know you want to add in sourcing. How do they get started with that?
I think it really is, all positions are not created equal. All recs are not equal. And again, you focus your attention on where it's needed, and it's not about what you think it's important. It's what the business thinks is important. And so it could be a volume question, right? It could be, you know what, we don't have enough retail sales associates in this one region, and we've got to get on that. And so we're going to put every resource that we have against that. But if your problem is more, and usually when we get called in, it's we're struggling, and I will be quite even more. It's usually within technology to find these people to fit in these roles, and that's where you actually place your bets, and you do a lot of the work around, well, why can't we find them? Is it a geography issue? Is it a compensation issue? And you understand that pretty clearly. Then you look at, okay, here's the market, and here's where we think you understand the position, and here's the market, here's where these people exist, and here's how we're going to go after them, and you create this strategy. And that's not just a recruiter and sourcer conversation. That's a larger conversation. That's where recruiting leaders have to get involved. Your managers have to get involved. And so once you have that process sort of down for that, like really going through the screening process about whether or not you do need industrial strength sourcing, then you can wash, rinse, repeat as your need grows or as priorities shift or what have you. But, I think spending a little bit of time up front, really understanding your priorities, understanding what you're going after, what the market looks like, that's going to save you a lot of heartache. So we were just talking about, there are a lot of sourcing efforts that kind of do this, right? They take off, everyone's excited, and sourcing's going to answer this problem. And then, there's all this friction between recruiters and handoffs, and then results aren't what we think they were going to be. And then suddenly the whole sourcing effort fizzles. And I think it's because we try to bite off more than we can chew.
Yeah, I think there's something about what you said, which I love, because I think what happens is TA leaders get so stuck in, we built this process, it's a really good process, and now we're having a problem, and so we want to fix the process. We want to fix the problem, but don't break our process. Don't touch our process. And what you're saying is, hey, strategy first, And then from the strategy, the process will come out of that. And so often you and people, you guys will get called in, and there's other people, that do the consultancy side that get called in, and it's like, oh my gosh, we have the perfect process. It works so great for us in talent acquisition. Hey, everybody.
That process is beautiful. The hires on the other end are there, but that process is really stellar.
For sure.
It's looking, it's objectives, strategy, then tactics, and sourcing is a tactic. And so figuring out, that objective piece first by being aligned with your business leaders, and then the strategy piece by understanding the market, and then figuring out who does what, when, how. And I think we have to be a lot more fluid with process, and our tools help us do that, I think, these days. I think, many people are building tools to help us be a lot more flexible, but, sticking to a process that works perhaps very well for one part of the organization might not work so well for the other part.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, everybody, you're listening to SmashUps, the recruiting marketing podcast with myself and my guest, Carmen Hudson from the Recruiting Toolbox. And Carmen, I want to go on with, you talked a little bit about the pod concept, and I think there's probably some other designs or whatever that you guys work with, but really the most effective way that you've seen this work in an organization. And again, you might have to kind of frame it with, hey, here was the problem, here's how effective it is. But where do you see, from a design perspective or just from a, an organizational perspective, of how it works best?
Well, I have a preference for putting sourcers with sourcers. So
explain that.
Yeah,
versus what?
Well, as sourcers, we are a special breed, right? We love to learn.
You're
and we
unique
can
little butterflies, yeah.
Yes, we are. We're special. And we like to be around each other, and we like to learn from each other, which is why, if you notice, in the recruiting community, the most active communities are the sourcing communities.
Oh, by far, yeah.
We're learning. We're actively using those communities to learn. However, if you leave us to our own devices, we will never produce and hire. We will find all the coolest tools. We will figure out new strings. We will bet each other on who can find the number of engineers fastest, but we will never produce a hire. So you can't kind of leave us to our own devices. You really have to figure out a way to integrate the team, manage the team, but also give them that space to learn together. That's what's missing. And if you isolate a sourcer, you really take away a good, probably 25%, maybe a third of his or her power if you isolate them.
What do you find that most organizations start out with recruiter or sourcer reporting into a recruiter? And again, why is that not necessarily a good design? I mean, you talked a little bit about that, but
I think it's the worst thing ever. But again, I'm biased. It sets up this. I hate the term junior sourcer. That is ridiculous to me. If you have someone who's a great sourcer, if they are great at finding scarce talent, quite frankly, they can probably much more easily transition into a full cycle recruiter role, vice versa. So that gives them a higher level set of skills, and that's often not recognized. Now, you will find many sourcers who are quite talented who can't transition into that full cycle recruiter role. They don't have that skill level. They don't have the polish to reach out to senior level candidates, whatever that reasoning is. And so you kind of have to look at that. But I think for the most part, you will find that recruiters and sourcers are on par. We have to recognize that they are different skills, equal skills. When you find someone who has an equal amount of both, you've got a unicorn. Hide them well, and feed them whatever they want, whatever unicorns eat. But most of the time, recruiters either they lean toward, I'm great client facing, I'm great converting leads into candidates, or it is I am great at finding out where people are and figuring out what scarce talent looks like and bringing them into the organization. So
for sure, yeah. All right.
I don't believe in this whole, East Coast, West Coast, Sharps, Jets thing.
No, I agree with you. I think it happens nonstop. And my thing was always, I think the sourcers are more valuable to me. Like, I would want them. Like, if I had to do, all of a sudden we're picking dodgeball teams, I'm going to, my team's going to be filled with sourcers because I'm like going, they have the skill sets to find the talent. we can stumble around in the dark and talk somebody into coming to work for us. The other way around doesn't work very often, you know. So I
I used to believe that until I was at Yahoo and I ran into a finance team, and the finance team was struggling, and we thought it was a candidate problem. Dug into it, it wasn't. I put some great full cycle recruiters, and I still have, to this day, I haven't heard from that VP, right? So it's been 10 years. You haven't heard another call. But it's really about looking at what is the problem, right?
Yeah.
What's going on? The problem was they didn't have the right recruiters who could engage that population of talent. So
Yeah.
figuring that out.
Well, and again, you just get back to you have the strategic mindset of thinking about going, let's really look at the problem instead of just continuing to solve symptoms that we think is the issue, and then you guys come in and actually solve the real problems that are there, which is sometimes so hard when we're a talent acquisition leader in the weeds.
Yeah.
You just want to keep going down this path and you keep banging a hammer on the same thing and it doesn't work, and somebody comes in and within a minute you go, here's your problem. And you're like, oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, I should have thought of that. Well, but if I were picking a dodgeball team, I would pick sourcing.
All right, I'm gonna get you out on this question. Taking a look into the future, and I know you guys do some of this at Talent 42 as well. Taking a really look at it, where do you see sourcing in the future? Near, far? How do you see it evolving? Where's it going?
I think this idea that started popping up maybe 3-5 years ago that all the talent we ever need will soon be available to us online, and we're getting closer and closer to that. I think there's there are some positions for which you'll never find your large population, usually entry level, online. But I've been looking at some products these days, and the amount of data that they've captured is amazing. And I can see a day where everyone that we want to know is online. What we will start to get better at is really micro-slicing who it is that we need to bring into our organization, and really get closer to, I think, our leadership around understanding that for now and the future and how that will shift. I think data will afford us that ability to really be strategic when thinking about, do we need another flavor of engineer to help us for future projects, or do we stay with what we've been bringing in the future? And we'll be better able to answer those questions. And it'd be cool if sourcing were at the table for those discussions.
Yeah, there's almost like a middleware kind of environment starting to happen between sourcing and recruiting, where you go, okay, now we have like these giant buckets of talent, and then we have recruiting, and even Google and all of their data have said we're no better than a coin flip when we go to select people. So how do you start matching jobs, companies, and people together, and that whole algorithm that starts to take shape? And there's some really ones I know that you and I have both seen that are, it's keyword algorithms, it's location algorithms, stuff like this, which is kind of very elementary. And then there's some other ones that really get involved with what somebody's desires are for an occupation, what the company's desires are for an employee, and some of that stuff in terms of getting matched, which I'm really excited about that technology, because you start to see now that fit selection coming in, which again, where does that fit? In terms of like the technology stack and all of that within sourcing, but I think it's a huge part, because the best sourcers find great talent that fit the organization, and that becomes a huge deal.
Yeah. Eventually, I think we'll just be replaced by robots.
There it is. There it is. Do you have a great robot technology you like right now?
Exactly.
Carmen?
No, I think you're right. I think that ability, I mean, that's what we when we train hiring managers on interviewing, it's really about getting them to understand how to interview for that fit piece.
Yeah.
And it's a simple example is that we like people who are responsible and show up on time. What we don't do when we interview is actually get aligned on what showing up on time means, right? It might mean, we are a tech organization and we get going usually around 10:30.
Yeah.
It's pretty common here in Seattle. Not so common in the Midwest, right?
No, when we got on the phone call and you're West Coast, I'm East Coast, and you go, oh, it's morning, and I'm thinking it's like 11:30 your time. What do you mean morning?
11:30. Your day's half over, right?
Oh yeah, I'm on the backside getting ready to go home.
Exactly. But if you don't ask a candidate, what time do you usually get started, right? Not do you like to show up on time, but what time do you actually get started? Then you're missing some data. So getting really precise about collecting the data is what we train hiring managers, and maybe we can get even more precise, in screening and get some of that easy stuff out of the way using the robots that will control my life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love you, robots. I love you all.
Carmen, thank you very much for coming on SmashUps. Loved having you. Make sure, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me, Carmen, at recruitingtoolbox.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at PeopleShark on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter for sure.
At PeopleShark is one of the best Twitter handles out there. So that you make sure you follow her there. And also, if you have a chance in June, you need to be out at Talent 42, one of the best technical recruiting conferences on the planet. Not only is it content, but they actually do training and help you become better. It's such an awesome environment out there. So make sure you check her out. Thanks to smashfly.com for allowing us to do this. And as always, fistful of talent. We're out. We'll see you next time.